In suburban Millbrook, an 80-year-old grandmother faced her family's intervention. What started as a birthday celebration turned shocking when her children demanded she surrender her keys. Evelyn Morrison wasn't your typical elderly woman. For decades, she'd been a trauma nurse and single mother, known for fierce independence. When her family staged their intervention, she had no idea she was making the most rebellious decision of her life. Evie's response would lead to a motorcycle journey that shattered her family's beliefs about aging. What began as betrayal became a battle that changed them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sunlight streams through Evie Morrison's kitchen windows, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors she'd polished that morning. At 80, her movements carry the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent a lifetime caring for others, first as a nurse, then as a mother, and now as the keeper of family traditions. The house smells of vanilla cake and fresh coffee, the dining room table groaning under the weight of her efforts. Homemade lasagna, Caesar salad, garlic bread that fills the air with warmth. "This looks wonderful, Evie," Frank Morrison says, adjusting his tie as he surveys the spread. At 78, her late husband's brother still maintains the careful grooming of his banking days, though retirement has softened his edges. His eyes linger on her face a moment longer than necessary, a habit he's never quite broken, even after all these years of loving her from the respectful distance of family obligation. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he continues, though they both know she always does. "It's who she is." "Nonsense," Evie replies, smoothing her emerald green blouse, the one that brings out her eyes, though she'd never admit that's why she chose it. 80 comes around only once. Might as well do it properly. The doorbell chimes, and soon the house fills with the comfortable chaos of family gathering. David arrives first, as always, carrying a bouquet of daisies and wearing the slightly rumpled look of a high school art teacher on summer break. At 49, he still has the gangly frame of his teenage years, all elbows and apologetic smiles. "Happy birthday, Mom," he says, kissing her cheek with the gentle affection that has always been his way. The cake looks incredible. Sarah follows minutes later, herding her two children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake, while balancing a gift bag and what appears to be a yoga mat forgotten from her morning class. At 45, she's maintained the willowy grace that made her the family's wild child, though motherhood has layered her free spirit with a patina of suburban respectability. "Grandma Evie," Emma squeals, launching herself into Evie's arms with the fearless affection of childhood. "Mom says you're really, really old now." "Emma!" Sarah gasps, but Evie laughs, the genuine, surprised laugh that her family hasn't heard often enough lately. "Really, really old," Evie agrees solemnly, "ancient as the hills." The last to arrive is Maggie, and Evie notices immediately that something is different. Her eldest daughter moves with the contained energy of a courtroom lawyer preparing for cross-examination. At 52, Margaret Chen Morrison has built her life on controlling variables, managing outcomes, winning cases. Today she carries herself like someone about to argue the most important case of her career. Behind Maggie, 16-year-old Ruby slouches through the door, her purple hair a deliberate affront to her mother's conservative sensibilities. She gives Evie a genuine smile, the first real one she's offered in months, and plants a kiss on her grandmother's cheek. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she murmurs. "Love the color choice." She nods toward Evie's blouse with approval that feels like conspiracy. The meal proceeds with the comfortable rhythms of family tradition. Frank tells stories about his latest fishing adventures. David describes his summer art project, a series of landscapes painted from his bicycle. Sarah shares updates about her yoga classes and the small rebellions of her children. Even Ruby contributes, describing a documentary project she's working on for school. Evie watches them all, storing these moments like treasures. The way David's eyes light up when he talks about painting. Sarah's unconscious grace as she reaches across the table. Ruby's fierce intelligence when she thinks no one is watching. Even Maggie's controlled perfection feels precious in this light, though something about her daughter's stillness sets alarm bells ringing in Evie's mind. It's after the gifts have been opened and appropriately admired, that Maggie clears her throat with the particular authority she reserves for important announcements. "Before everyone leaves," she says, and the room goes quiet in the way that families do when they sense something momentous approaching. "David, Sarah and I have been talking about Mom's situation." Evie feels the word situation like a physical blow. "My situation? We're worried about you," Maggie continues, and now Evie can see the choreography of it all. How David and Sarah have positioned themselves on either side of their older sister. How Frank has been subtly excluded from whatever conversation led to this moment. "The driving, Mom," David says gently, as if his soft tone can cushion what's coming. "We've noticed some concerns. You scraped Mrs. Patterson's mailbox last month," Sarah adds, her voice carrying the particular mix of love and judgment that Evie remembers from her daughter's teenage years. "And that close call at the intersection on Maple Street. That was the sun in my eyes," Evie interrupts, but she can hear how defensive she sounds. "And I barely touched that mailbox. Mom." Maggie's voice carries the weight of legal certainty. "You're 80. Your reflexes aren't what they were. Your night vision." "My reflexes are fine." Evie's voice hardens, though something cold is spreading through her chest. "My vision is fine. I passed my last driving test without any problems." "That was 3 years ago." Maggie presses on, relentless as only a lawyer can be. "Things change. We love you too much to let you hurt yourself. Or someone else." The room has gone silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. A wedding gift from 45 years ago that has marked every significant moment of Evie's adult life. She looks around the table, seeing her children's faces set in the expression she recognizes from their childhood. The united front they would present when they wanted something, when they'd discuss strategy beforehand. "You discussed this," she says quietly. "Behind my back. You planned this." "Mom," David starts, but Evie holds up a hand. "At my birthday party." Her voice is gaining strength, though something fragile is breaking inside her chest. "You decided to ambush me at my own birthday party." "It's not an ambush," Sarah says quickly. "It's an intervention. It's love." Ruby's phone is out, Evie notices peripherally, the girl apparently recording this humiliation for posterity. But instead of feeling betrayed, Evie catches the expression on her granddaughter's face, disgust, pure and simple, directed entirely at her mother. "We've researched senior transportation services," Maggie continues, producing a folder from her purse, with the efficiency of someone who is prepared for every objection. "There's a wonderful program that, get out." The words fall into the silence like stones into still water. "Mom," David says carefully, "we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect you. Get out of my house." Evie's voice is quiet, but it carries the authority of someone who has managed trauma units and difficult patients and 3 strong-willed children. "All of you. Now." "Evie," Frank says gently, "maybe we should." "Not you, Frank." She doesn't look at him, can't bear to see whether he's part of this conspiracy or simply another casualty. Just them. The exodus is painful and awkward. David lingers, clearly wanting to repair whatever has been broken. Sarah gathers her children with the particular urgency of someone trying to shield them from adult conflict. Maggie packs up her folder with tight-lipped efficiency, her face set in the expression Evie recognizes as wounded righteousness. "This isn't over, Mom," Maggie says at the door. "We're going to keep you safe, whether you like it or not." "Good luck with that," Ruby mutters, loud enough for everyone to hear. The house falls quiet except for the sound of car engines starting and driving away. Frank hovers in the kitchen, clearly uncertain of his welcome. "You should go too," Evie says, but without the same steel in her voice. "Evie," he says carefully, "they love you. They're scared. They want to put me in a box marked elderly and decide what I can and can't do." She finally looks at him, seeing the sympathy in his eyes and hating how much she needs it. "I raised those children to be strong and independent, and now they want to take that away from me." "Maybe they just Frank. Her voice is tired now, all the fight drained out of her. Please. I need to be alone. He nods, understanding as always, and kisses her forehead before letting himself out. Evie stands in her kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of celebration turned catastrophe. Dirty dishes crowd the sink. Cake crumbs scatter the counter. The house feels enormous and empty around her, filled with the echoes of words that can't be taken back. She climbs the stairs slowly, her knees protesting more than they did this morning. In her bedroom, she sits heavily on the edge of the bed she's slept in alone for 23 years, and stares at the photographs on her dresser. There she is at 25, crisp and confident in her nurse's uniform, ready to take on the world. At 30, holding baby Maggie with the fierce pride of new motherhood. At 35, pregnant again and glowing with the particular beauty of a woman who knows her own strength. When had she become someone who needed managing? When had her children stopped seeing the woman who had raised them and started seeing only an elderly problem to be solved? The woman in those photographs would never have accepted such treatment. That woman had saved lives, raised 3 children largely alone after Tom's death, built a life of purpose and dignity. That woman had dreams she'd set aside for responsibility. That woman had always wanted to ride a motorcycle. Evie picks up the photograph of herself at 25, remembering the afternoon it was taken. She'd been walking home from the hospital when a group of motorcycles had roared past, their riders leaning into curves with a freedom that had taken her breath away. She'd stood on the sidewalk watching them disappear, wondering what it would feel like to command such power, to move through the world with such bold autonomy. Someday, she'd whispered to herself that day, someday when I have time. 45 years later, she's still waiting for someday. But as she sits in the gathering darkness of her violated birthday, surrounded by photographs of a woman who is never afraid of anything, Evie Morrison begins to smile. It's not a pleasant smile. It's the smile of someone who has just decided to stop asking permission for her own life. Her children think she's too old to drive safely. They want to manage her choices, control her freedom, decide what risks she's allowed to take. Tomorrow, she thinks, still smiling that dangerous smile, she'll show them exactly what an 80-year-old woman is capable of. Tomorrow, she'll buy a motorcycle. The grandfather clock in Evie's hallway chimes 6 times, its deep bronze notes echoing through the quiet house. She's been awake since 4, sitting in her kitchen with a cup of coffee that has long gone cold, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the pale gold of early morning. The smile from last night hasn't left her face. If anything, it's grown more determined with each passing hour. Her children's words replay in her mind like a broken record. Your reflexes aren't what they were. Things change. We're going to keep you safe whether you like it or not. Each phrase stokes the fire that has been building in her chest since she climbed those stairs last night, surrounded by photographs of a woman who once faced down belligerent doctors and grieving families with equal composure. That woman wouldn't have sat quietly while others decided her fate. That woman would have fought back. Evie stands, joints protesting the early hour, and moves to her kitchen window. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson's house sits quiet, its mailbox bearing the small scratch that has become evidence of her supposed incompetence. 3 houses down, the Hendersons' sprinkler system runs its programmed cycle, sending arcs of water across their pristine lawn. Everything is normal, suburban, safe. She spent 40 years being safe. By 7:30, she showered and dressed in her most practical clothes. Dark jeans she bought for gardening, a long-sleeved cotton shirt, and the sturdy walking shoes David bought her last Christmas. In the mirror, she looks like exactly what she is. A practical, sensible woman of 80 who makes responsible choices. Today she plans to make her first irresponsible choice in decades. The drive to Torres Motorcycles takes 20 minutes through the increasingly commercial edge of Millbrook. Past the strip malls and chain restaurants that have sprouted like mushrooms in what used to be farmland. Evie grips the steering wheel of her sensible Honda Civic, the car her children have deemed her too dangerous to drive, and feels a perverse satisfaction in the steady confidence of her driving. No mistakes, no hesitation, no evidence of the declining faculties they're so worried about. Torres Motorcycles sits on a corner lot between a tire shop and a diner that's seen better days. The building is modest, concrete block painted blue with large windows that showcase gleaming machines in every color imaginable. A hand-painted sign reading "New and used all makes financing available" hangs above the entrance, and the parking lot is scattered with motorcycles in various stages of restoration. Evie pulls into a parking space and sits for a moment, her hands still gripping the wheel. Through the window, she can see rows of motorcycles lined up like sleeping giants, their chrome catching the morning light. The sight sends an unexpected thrill through her chest, part fear, part excitement, part desperate hope that she hasn't completely lost her mind. The bell above the door chimes as she enters, and the smell hits her immediately. Motor oil and leather, metal polish, and the indefinable scent of possibility. A man emerges from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He's younger than her children, mid-30s maybe, with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with machinery and the careful courtesy she recognizes from her years dealing with veterans at the hospital. "Morning," he says, his voice carrying a slight accent she can't quite place. "I'm Jake. Anything particular you're looking for today?" Evie straightens her shoulders, channeling the nurse who once had to convince skeptical doctors to listen to her assessment of critical patients. "I want to buy a motorcycle." Jake's eyebrows rise slightly, but to his credit, he doesn't laugh or launch into the speech she's bracing herself for about the dangers of motorcycles for someone her age. Instead, he studies her face with the attention of someone accustomed to reading people. "What kind of riding are you thinking about?" he asks. "Around town? Longer trips? Something specific in mind?" The question catches her off guard. She realizes she hasn't thought beyond the act of rebellion itself. I'm not sure. Something that makes a statement, I suppose." Now Jake does smile, but it's not condescending. It's the expression of someone who understands the appeal of making statements. "Well, let's take a look at some options. Any experience with motorcycles?" "None," Evie admits, "but I learned fast." He leads her through the showroom, past sleek sport bikes that look like crouching predators and massive touring bikes that seem designed for cross-country expeditions. Jake explains the basics as they walk. Engine sizes, riding positions, the differences between cruisers and sport bikes. And Evie finds herself genuinely listening, her mind cataloging information with the same systematic approach she once used to learn new medical procedures. "This might be something to consider," Jake says, stopping beside a bike that makes Evie's breath catch. It's a Harley-Davidson Street Glide, painted a deep, brilliant red that seems to glow under the showroom lights. The chrome gleams like jewelry, and the leather seat looks both comfortable and commanding. Everything about it suggests power held in careful check. "It's beautiful," Evie murmurs, stepping closer. "Can I?" "Of course." That woman wouldn't have sat quietly while others decided her fate. That woman would have fought back. Evie stands, joints protesting the early hour, and moves to her kitchen window. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson's house sits quiet, its mailbox bearing the small scratch that has become evidence of her supposed incompetence. 3 houses down, the Hendersons' sprinkler system runs its programmed cycle, sending arcs of water across their pristine lawn. Everything is normal, suburban, safe. She's spent 40 years being safe. By 7:30, she's showered and dressed in her most practical clothes. Dark jeans she bought for gardening, a long-sleeved cotton shirt, and the sturdy walking shoes David bought her last Christmas. In the mirror, she looks like exactly what she is, a practical, sensible woman of 80 who makes responsible choices. Today, she plans to make her first irresponsible choice in decades. The drive to Torres Motorcycles takes 20 minutes through the increasingly commercial edge of Millbrook, past the strip malls and chain restaurants that have sprouted like mushrooms in what used to be farmland. Evie grips the steering wheel of her sensible Honda Civic, the car her children have deemed her too dangerous to drive, and feels a perverse satisfaction in the steady confidence of her driving. No mistakes, no hesitation, no evidence of the declining faculties they're so worried about. Torres Motorcycles sits on a corner lot between a tire shop and a diner that's seen better days. The building is modest. Concrete block painted blue with large windows that showcase gleaming machines in every color imaginable. A hand-painted sign reading "New and used all makes financing available" hangs above the entrance, and the parking lot is scattered with motorcycles in various stages of restoration. Evie pulls into a parking space and sits for a moment, her hands still gripping the wheel. Through the windows, she can see rows of motorcycles lined up like sleeping giants, their chrome catching the morning light. The sight sends an unexpected thrill through her chest. Part fear, part excitement, part desperate hope that she hasn't completely lost her mind. The bell above the door chimes as she enters, and the smell hits her immediately. Motor oil and leather, metal polish, and the indefinable scent of possibility. A man emerges from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He's younger than her children, mid-30s maybe, with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with machinery and the careful courtesy she recognizes from her years dealing with veterans at the hospital. "Morning," he says, his voice carrying a slight accent she can't quite place. "I'm Jake. Anything particular you're looking for today?" Evie straightens her shoulders, channeling the nurse who once had to convince skeptical doctors to listen to her assessment of critical patients. "I want to buy a motorcycle." Jake's eyebrows rise slightly, but to his credit he doesn't laugh or launch into the speech she's bracing herself for about the dangers of motorcycles for someone her age. Instead, he studies her face with the attention of someone accustomed to reading people. "What kind of riding are you thinking about?" he asks. "Around town? Longer trips? Something specific in mind?" The question catches her off guard. She realizes she hasn't thought beyond the act of rebellion itself. I'm not sure. Something that makes a statement, I suppose." Now Jake does smile, but it's not condescending. It's the expression of someone who understands the appeal of making statements. "Well, let's take a look at some options. Any experience with motorcycles?" "None," Evie admits. "But I learn fast." He leads her through the showroom, past sleek sport bikes that look like crouching predators and massive touring bikes that seem designed for cross-country expeditions. Jake explains the basics as they walk. Engine sizes, riding positions, the differences between cruisers and sport bikes. And Evie finds herself genuinely listening, her mind cataloging information with the same systematic approach she once used to learn new medical procedures. "This might be something to consider," Jake says, stopping beside a bike that makes Evie's breath catch. It's a Harley-Davidson Street Glide, painted a deep, brilliant red that seems to glow under the showroom lights. The chrome gleams like jewelry, and the leather seat looks both comfortable and commanding. Everything about it suggests power held in careful check. "It's beautiful," Evie murmurs, stepping closer. "Can I?" "Of course." Jake steadies the bike as she approaches. "Go ahead and sit on it. Get a feel for the weight, the reach to the handlebars." Evie swings her leg over the seat with more grace than she expected, settling into the riding position. The bike is heavier than she anticipated, but not impossibly so. Her feet reach the ground easily, and when she grips the handlebars, something electric runs through her hands. For a moment, she can imagine the machine beneath her coming to life, imagine the freedom of acceleration and the wind against her face. "How does it feel?" Jake asks. "Like coming home," she says, before she can stop herself. Jake nods as if this makes perfect sense. "That's how you know it's the right one. But listen." He leans against the counter, his expression growing serious. "I've got to ask. This is a big machine, a lot of power. Have you thought about taking a safety course? Getting some instruction before—" "I'll do whatever's necessary," Evie interrupts. "Classes? Instruction? Proper gear. I'm not an idiot, young man. I spent my career making life and death decisions. I understand the importance of preparation." Something in her tone makes Jake straighten. She recognizes the shift, the moment when someone stops seeing an elderly woman and starts seeing the person she actually is. "What did you do?" he asks. "Before retirement?" "Trauma nurse. 35 years in emergency medicine." Jake whistles softly. "That explains it. You've got that look, like you've seen some things." "I've seen what happens when people make stupid decisions," Evie says. "I've also seen what happens when people stop living because they're afraid of dying." The words hang in the air between them, carrying more weight than she intended. Jake studies her face again, and she can see him reassessing everything about this interaction. "You know what?" he says finally. "I think I can help you." But we're going to do this right. Full safety gear, proper instruction, licensing, the works. And I want you to promise me you'll take it slow. How much? Evie asks, nodding toward the red Harley. Jake names a figure that would have seemed enormous to the young nurse she once was. To the woman who has been carefully managing her finances for 40 years, who owns her house outright and has a pension that covers her needs, it's manageable. Not cheap, but manageable. I'll take it, she says. Ma'am, maybe you should think about... I've been thinking about it for 55 years, Evie interrupts. I'm done thinking. She reaches into her purse and withdraws her checkbook, the old-fashioned kind that her children keep telling her to abandon in favor of online banking. With careful precision, she writes out the full amount, tears off the check, and hands it to Jake. The young man stares at the check as if it might disappear. You're serious. Deadly serious. Ma'am, what's your name? Evelyn Morrison. Evie. Evie, I have to ask, does your family know about this? The question brings back the sting of last night's humiliation, the sight of her children arrayed against her like prosecutors presenting their case. My family thinks I'm too old to drive a car safely. They've decided to manage my life for me. Understanding dawns in Jake's eyes. Ah, this isn't just about buying a motorcycle. No, Evie agrees, it's not. Jake looks down at the check again, then back at her. Something passes across his face. A recognition, perhaps, or a memory. My grandfather, he says quietly, spent the last 5 years of his life sitting in a chair, letting everyone decide what he could and couldn't do. He used to tell me he regretted every adventure he didn't take. Smart man. Yeah, he was. Jake folds the check and slips it into his shirt pocket. All right, Evie Morrison, let's get you set up with proper gear and schedule some lessons. But I'm warning you, once you start down this road, there's no going back. Evie thinks about her empty house, about the photographs of a younger woman who once believed anything was possible, about her children's faces when they discover what she's done. Good, she says. I'm tired of going backward. The next hour passes in a blur of measurements and fittings. Jake introduces her to helmets and leather jackets, protective pants and gloves designed to save skin in case of a fall. Each piece of gear transforms her a little more, covering the suburban grandmother in the armor of someone who takes risks, who chooses adventure over safety. When can we start lessons? Evie asks as Jake rings up the additional purchases. How about tomorrow morning? 8 o'clock? I've got a practice lot out back where we can start with the basics. Perfect. As Jake processes the paperwork, other employees begin to gather. Word has apparently spread through the shop that an 80-year-old woman has just bought a Harley, and the mechanics and salespeople can't quite hide their curiosity. Evie straightens under their attention, feeling more alive than she has in years. Mrs. Morrison. One of them says, a young woman with grease under her fingernails and a sleeve of tattoos. That's a sweet ride you picked out. Thank you, Evie replies and realizes she means it. For the first time in months, someone is speaking to her as an equal, not as a problem to be managed. Jake hands her the keys to the motorcycle. Actual keys, heavy and real in her palm. We'll keep her here until you're ready to ride her home. But these are yours. Evie closes her fingers around the keys, feeling their weight like a promise. When she looks up, Jake is watching her with something that might be admiration. Your family's going to have some opinions about this, he says. Let them, Evie replies. I've spent 60 years being who they needed me to be. It's time to remember who I am. She drives home in her sensible Honda, the motorcycle keys burning a hole in her pocket. But for the first time since last night's disaster, she's not thinking about her children's betrayal or her own humiliation. She's thinking about tomorrow morning, about the weight of a machine beneath her, about the moment when she'll stop being Evelyn Morrison, the elderly woman who needs managing, and become someone new. Someone who rides. The keys rest on Evie's nightstand all night, their metal edges catching moonlight like a promise she's made to herself. She wakes before her alarm, joints stiff from a restless sleep filled with dreams of acceleration and wind. By 7:15, she's standing in her bedroom mirror, encased in black leather like a warrior preparing for battle. The riding gear transforms her completely. The helmet Jake fitted yesterday sits heavy on her shoulders, waiting to be worn. The leather jacket, stiff with newness, makes her movements deliberate and purposeful. In the protective pants and boots, she looks nothing like the suburban grandmother her children ambushed yesterday. She looks dangerous. The drive back to Tora's motorcycles feels different this morning. Every turn, every stop sign, every moment of her supposedly compromised driving becomes evidence of competence her children refuse to see. She parks beside the shop and sits for a moment, watching Jake prepare the practice area through the chain-link fence that separates the lot from the main road. "Ready for this?" she asks her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her, suited in leather, eyes bright with determination, doesn't look like someone who needs permission for anything. Jake is waiting with her red Harley when she rounds the building. In the morning light, the bike seems even more magnificent, its chrome gleaming like jewelry, its presence commanding attention. Behind the dealership, the practice lot stretches out like a small parking lot, marked with orange cones and painted lines that suggest order within chaos. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "How'd you sleep?" Jake asks, steadying the bike as she approaches. "Barely," Evie admits. "Too excited." "Good sign. Means you're taking this seriously." He gestures toward the bike. "Today we start with the basics. Before you even think about starting the engine, you need to understand what you're dealing with." For the next hour, Jake walks her through every component of the machine. He shows her how to check tire pressure, oil levels, and brake fluid. His hands are patient as he guides hers to the controls, clutch lever, throttle, front and rear brakes. Each piece of information settles into her mind with the systematic precision she once used to learn new medical equipment. "The most important thing," Jake says, his voice carrying the authority of experience, "is respect. This machine can go from 0 to 60 faster than most cars. It can also put you in the hospital if you don't treat it right." Evie nods, remembering trauma bay admissions, the particular injuries that came with motorcycle accidents. "I've sewn up enough road rash to understand the stakes." "Good. Now let's see how you handle the weight." The first time she tries to walk the bike forward, it nearly gets away from her. 700 pounds of metal and machinery don't forgive tentative handling, and the Harley lurches to the left before Jake catches it. "Confident movements," he instructs. The bike can sense hesitation. It's like working with horses. They know when you're afraid. On the third try, Evie manages to walk the bike in a straight line across the practice area. The weight becomes manageable when she stops fighting it, when she accepts the partnership between human and machine. By the time Jake allows her to start the engine, sweat beads beneath her helmet despite the cool morning air. The Harley rumbles to life with a sound that travels through her body like electricity. The vibration settles into her bones, and suddenly she understands what every motorcycle enthusiast has tried to explain to non-riders. This isn't just transportation. This is power made manifest, freedom distilled into mechanical form. "Now we practice the friction zone," Jake says, his voice raised over the engine's rumble. The clutch becomes her enemy and her ally by turns. Too much throttle, and the bike lurches forward like an eager horse. Too little, and it stalls, leaving her stranded with Jake's patient encouragement to try again. Her left hand cramps from working the clutch lever, and her right wrist aches from controlling the throttle, but she refuses Jake's suggestions to take a break. "I'm 80 years old," she says during one of their brief pauses. "I don't have time for breaks." "You've got more time than you think," Jake replies, but something in his tone suggests he understands her urgency. By noon, she's managed to ride the bike in a complete circle around the practice lot. The achievement feels monumental, her first independent motion on two wheels, powered by her own decisions rather than someone else's judgments about her capabilities. When she comes to a stop and kills the engine, her hands are shaking with adrenaline and accomplishment. "Not bad for a first lesson," Jake says, and she can hear genuine approval in his voice. "When can we do it again?" "Tomorrow, same time." "But Evie..." He pulls off his own helmet, running a hand through dark hair damp with sweat. You need to pace yourself. Learning to ride is like learning surgery. You can't rush it. I never rush surgery, Evie agrees. But I never stopped until I got it right either. They're loading her gear into her Honda when Frank Morrison appears at the edge of the practice lot, his face a mixture of concern and bewilderment. At 78, her brother-in-law moves with the careful precision of someone who has learned to respect his body's limitations. But there's nothing careful about his expression as he stares at the red Harley. Evie, he says, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who isn't sure whether to be impressed or horrified. What in God's name are you doing? The question hangs in the air like an accusation. Jake glances between them, clearly calculating whether he should intervene or disappear. But Evie straightens her shoulders and faces Frank with the same determination she brought to difficult families in the emergency room. Learning to ride, she says simply. Why? The honest bewilderment in his voice cuts through her defensive anger. Frank isn't Maggie, armed with legal arguments and controlling impulses. He's genuinely trying to understand. Because yesterday, my children decided I was too old and incompetent to drive a car, she says. Because they ambushed me at my own birthday party and tried to take away the last piece of independence I have left. Frank's face softens with understanding. So you bought a motorcycle. So I bought a motorcycle. He walks closer to the Harley, studying its gleaming surfaces with the appreciation of someone who recognizes quality machinery. Tom always wanted one of these, he says quietly, referring to her late husband. Used to say someday we'd take a trip across the country, just him and a bike, and the open road. I remember. He never got the chance. The weight of unspoken words settles between them. Frank looks at her, really looks at her, and she sees the moment when he stops seeing his elderly sister-in-law and starts seeing the woman who once drove herself to the hospital in labor because Tom was out of town and she refused to wait for an ambulance. How was it? He asks. The lesson? Evie thinks about the feeling of the engine coming to life beneath her, the moment when the bike responded to her commands and carried her forward under her own power. Terrifying, she admits, and wonderful. Frank nods slowly, his gaze shifting between her face and the motorcycle. The children are going to lose their minds. Probably. Maggie's already called me twice today, wanting to know if I've talked to you. Evie's stomach tightens. What did you tell her? That you're a grown woman who can make her own decisions. His voice carries an edge she hasn't heard before. What I should have told all of them yesterday. The admission surprises her. Frank has always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over family conflicts and avoided taking sides. But something in his expression suggests yesterday's intervention affected him as much as it did her. Frank, she says carefully, can you keep this between us? Just until I'm ready? He considers the question, his eyes moving from her face to Jake, who has been standing quietly nearby, pretending not to listen to their family drama. How long? Frank asks. A few more lessons, maybe a week or two. And then what? Evie looks at the red Harley, imagining herself riding it down Millbrook's quiet streets. Imagining the looks on her neighbors' faces when they see Evelyn Morrison astride 700 pounds of rebellion. Then I show them exactly who they're dealing with, she says. Frank is quiet for a long moment, and she can see him weighing loyalty to his deceased brother's children against loyalty to the woman who has been part of his life for over 40 years. All right, he says finally, but Evie, be careful. Not because you're old, but because I can't bear to lose anyone else. The words carry the weight of recent widowhood, and Evie feels a rush of affection for this gentle man who has been her family's anchor for so many years. I will, she promises. Jake's a good teacher, and I'm not reckless. No, Frank agrees, looking at her with something that might be admiration. You never were, but you were always braver than the rest of us gave you credit for. As Frank drives away and Jake locks up the practice area, Evie sits in her Honda with her helmet in her lap, still feeling the echo of the motorcycle's vibration in her bones. Tomorrow she'll come back, and the day after that until she masters this machine and everything it represents. Her children think they know who she is, a fragile elderly woman who needs protection from her own poor judgment. But they're about to learn that some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to be themselves, and some people just take it. 3 days pass in a rhythm that feels almost normal. Evie wakes early, dresses in her leather armor, and drives to Tora's motorcycles for lessons that leave her muscles aching and her spirit soaring. Each morning, she grows more confident with the clutch, more comfortable with the weight of the machine beneath her. Each evening, she returns home to her quiet house, storing the gear in her closet like a secret identity waiting to be revealed. She's learned to start smoothly, to shift gears without stalling, to navigate the practice lot's cone course with increasing precision. Yesterday, Jake let her ride to the edge of the public road, not onto it, but close enough that she could feel the possibility of real freedom just beyond the chain-link fence. It's Thursday morning when her careful deception unravels. Evie is in her kitchen, savoring coffee and the pleasant ache in her forearms from yesterday's lesson, when she hears the unmistakable sound of Maggie's BMW pulling into her driveway with more force than necessary. Through the window, she watches her daughter emerge from the car like a storm gathering strength, her face set in the expression Evie recognizes as barely contained fury. The front door doesn't slam. Maggie is too controlled for such displays, but it closes with the sharp finality of a judge's gavel. Footsteps echo through the hallway with prosecutorial purpose. "Mother?" Maggie's voice carries from the entryway, and even that single word vibrates with accusation. "We need to talk." Evie sets down her coffee cup with deliberate calm, summoning the composure that once served her in trauma bays when everything was chaos but someone had to remain steady. "Good morning, Margaret. Coffee?" "Don't." Maggie appears in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her court clothes, a charcoal suit that makes her look like judgment personified. "Just don't. Mrs. Henderson saw you yesterday. At a motorcycle dealership. Wearing leather." The words hang in the air like an indictment. Evie considers several responses: denial, deflection, explanation, but settles on the truth. "Yes," she says simply. "Yes?" Maggie's voice climbs an octave. "That's it? Just yes? What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to tell me that Mrs. Henderson was mistaken. That you haven't lost your mind and bought a motorcycle 3 days after we had a rational conversation about your driving." Evie stands, drawing herself to her full height, feeling the muscle memory of authority she thought she'd lost. "Mrs. Henderson wasn't mistaken. And our conversation wasn't rational. It was an ambush. It was an intervention." Maggie's control begins to crack, revealing the fear beneath her anger. "It was 3 people who love you trying to keep you safe. It was 3 people who decided I'm too old to make my own decisions." "Because you are." The words explode out of Maggie with the force of months of worry. "Mom, you're 80. 80! You can't." "I can't what?" Evie interrupts, and now her own voice carries steel. "I can't think for myself? I can't assess risk? I can't live my life without your permission?" "You bought a motorcycle." Maggie gestures wildly, as if the words themselves prove her point. "A motorcycle! Do you have any idea what could happen to you?" "I have a very clear idea. I spent 35 years treating motorcycle accident victims." Evie moves closer to her daughter, watching Maggie's face cycle through disbelief and rage. "I also spent 35 years watching people die who never took a single risk, who played it safe until the day their hearts stopped beating. This isn't about taking risks. This is exactly about taking risks." Evie's voice rises to match her daughter's. "This is about you deciding that my life is too valuable to live." The sound of car doors slamming interrupts their fight. Through the window, Evie sees David's Honda and Sarah's minivan arriving simultaneously, their timing suggesting coordinated response to whatever emergency Maggie declared. "You called them," Evie says, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. "Of course I called them. This affects all of us." David appears first, his face creased with the particular worry of someone thrust into conflict he neither created nor understands. Behind him, Sarah herds her children, Emma and Jake looking wide-eyed at the tension crackling through the house like electricity. "Mom?" David's voice carries the careful tone of someone approaching a cornered animal. "Maggie says you bought a motorcycle?" "I bought a motorcycle," Evie confirms, and watches her son's face cycle through the same disbelief she saw in Maggie. "Why?" Sarah asks, settling her children on the living room couch with the practiced efficiency of a mother trying to shield them from adult chaos. "I mean, why now? Why this?" Because 3 days ago you all decided I was incompetent, Evie says, looking each of her children in the eye. You took away my dignity at my own birthday party. So I decided to show you what incompetent actually looks like. This isn't showing us anything except that you've lost your... Maggie begins, but David cuts her off. Maggie, stop. Just stop. He runs a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar from his childhood struggles with math homework. Mom, this is dangerous. Living is dangerous, Evie replies. Dying is safe. Don't be melodramatic, Maggie snaps, but there's something brittle in her voice now. This isn't about living or dying. This is about making smart choices. Smart according to whom? According to anyone with sense. According to you. Evie's voice cuts through Maggie's protests like a scalpel. According to the daughter who builds her life around controlling every variable, who thinks love means managing other people's risks. The words hit their target. Maggie's face goes white, then red, then white again. I am trying to protect you, she says, each word carefully controlled. From what? From living? From making my own mistakes? From dying? The admission tears out of Maggie like a confession under torture. From leaving us. From getting hurt because you're too proud to admit you're not 25 anymore. The silence that follows feels explosive. In the living room, 8-year-old Emma whispers something to her brother, and Sarah shushes them with the automatic response of a mother trying to pretend everything is normal. None of us are 25, Evie says quietly. You're 52, divorced, and so afraid of losing control that you're trying to control me. David's 49, unmarried, and so afraid of conflict that he's never fought for anything he wanted. Sarah's 45 with 2 children, and so afraid of being judged that she's forgotten who she used to be. Each observation lands like a blow. David's face reddens with the particular shame of truth recognized but not acknowledged. Sarah's hands still on her children's hair, her own struggles with conventional motherhood suddenly exposed. That's not fair, David says, but his voice lacks conviction. What's not fair, Evie continues, is spending 60 years being who everyone needed me to be and then being told I'm too old to decide who I want to be now. The sound of the front door opening interrupts the standoff. Ruby's voice carries from the hallway. What's all the yelling about? Followed by the teenager herself, purple hair bright against her black hoodie, phone already in her hand and recording. Ruby put that away. Maggie commands, but her daughter ignores her, focusing the camera on Evie with the intensity of a documentary filmmaker. Grandma, Ruby says, grinning with the particular delight teenagers reserve for adult chaos, please tell me you actually bought a motorcycle. I bought a motorcycle, Evie confirms, and Ruby's grin widens. That is so badass. Ruby! Maggie's voice carries parental outrage, but Ruby shrugs with practiced teenage indifference. What? It is. You guys treat her like she's made of glass, and she goes out and buys a Harley. I think it's awesome. You would, Maggie snaps. You think anything dangerous is awesome. I think anything that pisses off my mother is awesome. Ruby corrects with brutal teenage honesty. And this is definitely pissing you off. The multi-generational alliance forms in that moment. Ruby and Evie against the middle generation's fears and limitations. Maggie sees it happen, and something in her face shifts from anger to something approaching panic. You're not doing this, she says, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to winning arguments. I won't let you. How exactly, Evie asks, do you plan to stop me? Legal action if necessary, competency hearings, whatever it takes. The threat falls into the room like a bomb. David's face goes pale, and Sarah makes a small sound of distress. Even Ruby's phone wavers as she realizes the stakes have suddenly escalated beyond family drama. You would do that? Evie's voice is very quiet. You would try to have me declared incompetent because I bought a motorcycle? If that's what it takes to keep you safe. The words create a silence so complete that the grandfather clock's ticking sounds like gunshots. Evie looks at her eldest daughter, the child she raised to be strong and independent, who is now threatening to take away her mother's legal right to independence. Get out, Evie says. Mom, all of you, get out of my house. We're not leaving you like this, David says, but there's uncertainty in his voice. You're not leaving me like anything. You're just leaving. The exodus is painful and complicated. Sarah tries to gather her children while whispering apologies. David hovers near the door, clearly wanting to say something healing, but lacking the words. Maggie maintains her rigid composure, but there's something desperate in her eyes as she realizes she may have just destroyed the relationship she was trying to protect. Ruby is the last to leave, pausing at the door with her phone still in her hand. "Grandma?" she says quietly. "Can I come watch you ride it sometime?" "Ruby," Maggie warns. "Yes," Evie says, meeting her granddaughter's eyes. "You can." After they leave, the house feels enormous and empty, filled with the echoes of words that can't be taken back. Evie stands in her kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of family warfare, and feels both victorious and devastated. Her phone buzzes with a text from Frank, heard shouting from across the street, "Everything okay?" She types back, "The secret's out." His response comes immediately, "Want company?" For the first time since the fight began, Evie smiles. "Yes." Frank arrives within minutes, carrying a thermos of coffee and the particular expression of someone who has decided to stop being neutral. They sit at Evie's kitchen table in comfortable silence, the weight of the morning's confrontation settling between them like dust after an explosion. "Maggie threatened legal action," Evie says finally. Frank's jaw tightens. "She's scared. She's controlling." That too. He pours coffee into two mismatched mugs, the domestic gestures somehow comforting after the morning's chaos. But mostly scared. She lost her father young, went through a difficult divorce. Losing you feels impossible to her. So she'd rather bury me alive than risk losing me to an accident. People do strange things when they're afraid of grief. Evie studies Frank's face, seeing the weight of his own recent loss in the lines around his eyes. His wife died 18 months ago, leaving him to navigate widowhood with the same careful precision he'd brought to banking. But there's something different about him today, a resolution that wasn't there before. "What are you thinking?" she asks. "I'm thinking," Frank says slowly, "that I've spent the last year and a half being careful, being safe, and I'm tired of it." They sit with that admission until Frank's phone buzzes with what can only be family drama. He glances at it, sighs, and turns it face down on the table. "Maggie?" Evie asks. "David. Apparently you're having a crisis and I need to talk sense into you." "Are you going to?" Frank meets her eyes with something that might be mischief. "I'm going to suggest you take that motorcycle for a proper ride." An hour later, Evie stands beside her red Harley in the Torres Motorcycles parking lot, her hands shaking slightly as she performs the pre-ride inspection Jake taught her. Oil level, tire pressure, brake fluid, each check builds her confidence while reminding her of the morning's confrontation. Her children think she's having a breakdown. Instead, she's having a breakthrough. The engine rumbles to life with familiar authority, settling into her bones like a promise kept. Jake appears at her elbow, studying her face with the particular attention of someone reading readiness. "You sure about this?" he asks. "I've never been more sure of anything." He nods, stepping back as she eases out the clutch and rolls toward the street. The moment the Harley's wheels touch public asphalt, everything changes. This isn't practice anymore. This is freedom distilled into mechanical form, 70 years of deferred dreams finally given throttle and direction. Millbrook's suburban streets unfold before her, like a familiar map redrawn with possibility. Past the elementary school where she once delivered forgotten lunches, past the pharmacy where she collected prescriptions for Tom's final illness, past the neighbors, houses that have watched her become a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and now this. She rides toward the lake where Tom used to fish, where she sometimes goes to remember what it felt like to be half of something larger than herself. The Harley handles the country roads with steady confidence, carrying her toward conversations she needs to have with ghosts and promises she needs to make to herself. Behind her, Millbrook grows smaller in her mirrors. Ahead, the road opens like an invitation to remember who she was before she became who everyone needed her to be. The lake appears through the trees like a memory made manifest, its surface reflecting the afternoon sky in ripples of silver and blue. Evie downshifts as she approaches Tom's favorite fishing spot, the Harley's engine settling into a contented rumble as she pulls into the gravel parking area. For a moment, she just sits on the bike, engine idling, feeling the weight of 43 years of marriage and 23 years of widowhood pressing against her chest. Tom would have loved this, she thinks, imagining his face if he could see her astride 700 pounds of gleaming rebellion. He'd have been proud of her for finally taking the risk they'd always talked about, but never quite dared to take together. Her phone buzzes with a text from Jake. "How's the first solo ride going?" She types back with gloved fingers. "Perfect, thank you." His response comes immediately. "Want to meet some people who might understand what you're going through. There's a group gathering at Murphy's Diner in an hour. Interested?" Evie stares at the message, feeling the weight of the morning's family confrontation still heavy on her shoulders. The idea of facing strangers while her emotions are so raw feels daunting. But the alternative, returning home to an empty house filled with echoes of her children's disapproval, feels worse. "Yes," she types back. Murphy's Diner sits on the edge of town like a relic from a simpler time. Its neon sign promising good food, good coffee, good people, in letters that have been flickering for decades. The parking lot tells the story before Evie even shuts off her engine. A dozen motorcycles arranged in neat rows, their chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun. These aren't the aggressive sport bikes favored by young riders, but touring machines and cruisers built for comfort and distance. Bikes chosen by people who understand the value of both adventure and wisdom. Jake is waiting near the entrance, his face lighting up when he sees her navigate the Harley into an open space with growing confidence. "Not bad," he says as she removes her helmet. "How did it feel?" "Like coming alive," Evie admits, running her fingers through hair that's been flattened by the helmet but somehow feels more free than it has in years. "Good. That's exactly how it should feel." He gestures toward the diner's windows, where she can see people gathered around pushed-together tables, their conversation animated and comfortable. "Ready to meet the Grey Riders?" The name makes her smile despite her nervousness. "Grey Riders?" Not the most creative name, Jake admits with a grin, but accurate. Average age is probably 72. They've been riding together for about 15 years, ever since Tommy Patterson decided he was tired of people telling him he was too old for road trips. Inside the diner, the conversation stops when Jake leads her to the large corner table, where 8 people sit surrounded by coffee cups and half-eaten pie. The silence lasts only a moment before a man with silver hair and laugh lines around bright blue eyes stands and extends his hand. "You must be Evie," he says, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone accustomed to putting people at ease. "I'm Tommy Patterson, but everyone calls me Reverend Jakes told us about your recent purchase." Rev Patterson is not what Evie expected. At 82, he moves with the fluid grace of someone who has spent decades trusting his body to carry him safely through challenges. His handshake is firm without being aggressive, and when he smiles, she feels something flutter in her chest that she hasn't experienced in over 2 decades. Jake exaggerates, she says, accepting the seat he offers between him and a woman with silver braids and eyes that sparkle with mischief. "I'm Dorothy," the woman says, "but everyone calls me Dot." And Jake doesn't exaggerate, he understates. Buying a Harley at 80 and learning to ride it takes serious backbone. The introductions flow around the table. Bill and Martha, married 53 years and riding together for 30. Frank, not her Frank, but a retired teacher with a passion for vintage Hondas. Susan, a former airline pilot who switched to motorcycles when she retired. Jim, whose massive beard can't hide his gentle smile. And Carol, who looks like a librarian until she starts describing her solo trip through the Canadian Rockies last summer. "So," Rev says, settling back into his chair with the easy confidence of someone comfortable being the center of attention, "Jake tells us your family isn't entirely supportive of your new hobby." Evie feels heat rise in her cheeks. "That's one way to put it. What's another way?" Dot asks, and there's something in her tone that suggests she's heard this story before. "They think I've lost my mind," Evie admits. "My oldest daughter threatened legal action this morning. The response is immediate and unanimous. Groans, eye rolls, and muttered comments about helicopter children and overprotective families." Evie looks around the table in amazement, seeing her own experience reflected in their faces. "My son tried to have my bike impounded. Bill says, shaking his head. Called the police and everything, told them his elderly father was having a breakdown. What happened? Evie asks. Bill grins. Officer who responded was a rider himself. Took one look at my license, my gear, and my bike maintenance records, and told my son to mind his own business. The stories flow like a support group for motorcycle riding seniors. Adult children staging interventions, friends expressing concern, neighbors gossiping about dangerous behavior. But running through every story is the same thread: the absolute refusal to let other people's fears dictate their choices. The thing is, Rev says, his voice growing serious as he leans forward, they think they're protecting us, but they're actually killing us. How so? Evie asks, though she suspects she knows the answer. By making us smaller, Susan interjects. By convincing us that getting older means getting less capable, less adventurous, less alive. I spent 40 years flying commercial jets, Martha adds quietly. I trusted my life and the lives of hundreds of passengers to my judgment and reflexes every single day. But when I turned 70, suddenly my own children thought I couldn't be trusted to drive to the grocery store. So what did you do? Bought a motorcycle, Martha says with a grin that makes her look decades younger. Figured if they were going to worry anyway, I might as well give them something worth worrying about. The laughter that follows feels like medicine, washing away the last of the morning's pain and humiliation. For the first time since her birthday intervention, Evie feels understood rather than judged, celebrated rather than managed. The truth is, Rev says, his eyes meeting Evie's with an intensity that makes her pulse quicken. Riding keeps us sharp. It demands attention, quick reflexes, good judgment. Everything they think we're losing, we're actually maintaining. Plus, Dot adds with a wicked grin, it scares the hell out of people who think we should be sitting in rocking chairs waiting to die. Speaking of which, Rev continues, we're planning a day trip this Saturday. Scenic route through the mountains, lunch at a place that serves the best barbecue in 3 counties. You interested? Evie feels a flutter of fear, mixed with excitement. I've only been riding for a week. We'll take it slow, Bill assures her. No pressure, no showing off. Just good roads and good company. Plus, Carol adds, you'll have the best possible riding companions. We've all been exactly where you are, dealing with family opposition, learning to trust ourselves again, figuring out who we are now that everyone's decided we're too old to be interesting. The offer hangs in the air like an invitation to a new life. Evie thinks about her empty house, about her children's angry faces, about the legal threats and competency hearings that may be waiting for her. Then she thinks about the feeling of the Harley beneath her, the wind against her face, the possibility of mountains and barbecue and people who understand the difference between safety and surrender. Yes, she says. I'd love to. The table erupts in approving nods and murmurs of welcome. Rev's smile is particularly warm, and when his hand briefly covers hers on the table, Evie feels something she thought had died with Tom. The electric possibility of connection with someone who sees her as she really is rather than as age has supposedly diminished her. Fair warning, Dot says with mock seriousness. Once you ride with us, you'll never want to ride alone again. We're addictive. Good, Evie replies, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm tired of being alone. As the conversation flows on, stories of epic rides and mechanical disasters, advice about gear and routes, gentle teasing about rookie mistakes, Evie feels something she hasn't experienced in years. The sensation of belonging somewhere she hasn't had to earn her place by being useful or helpful or appropriate. Near the window, she catches a glimpse of movement and turns to see a familiar purple-haired figure trying to look inconspicuous behind a newspaper. Ruby has apparently followed her, and the sight of her granddaughter's obvious attempt at surveillance makes Evie smile. Excuse me for a moment, she says, standing and walking toward the window. Ruby looks up from her newspaper, which, Evie notices with amusement, is upside down, with the expression of someone caught red-handed. Grandma, she says, trying for nonchalance and failing completely. What a coincidence. Ruby Morrison, Evie says, using the full name in the tone that once made her children confess to broken lamps and stolen cookies. "Are you spying on me? I prefer conducting surveillance." Ruby replies with the dignity of someone who has clearly given this answer some thought. "And also, oh my God, Grandma, you look so cool right now." Evie glances back at the table full of Grey Riders, seeing herself through Ruby's eyes, surrounded by people who treat her as an equal, wearing leather-like armor, planning adventures instead of accepting limitations. "Come meet them," she says impulsively. "Really?" "Really. But first, call your mother and tell her where you are before she calls the police." Ruby's face lights up with the particular joy of a teenager being treated like an adult. As she dials her phone, Evie returns to the table where Rev and the others are watching with obvious curiosity. "My granddaughter," she explains. 16, rebellious, and apparently following me. "Sounds like good genes," Rev says with approval. When Ruby approaches the table, phone call completed and nervous energy barely contained, the Grey Riders welcome her with the same warmth they've shown Evie. Within minutes, she's deep in conversation with Susan about the physics of motorcycle cornering, her natural intelligence engaged in a way that school rarely manages to achieve. "Smart kid," Rev observes quietly, leaning close enough that Evie catches the scent of leather and motor oil that seems to cling to all serious riders. "Takes after her grandmother," Evie replies, and realizes she means it. For the first time in years, she feels proud of the example she's setting, rather than worried about the chaos she might be causing. As the afternoon stretches toward evening, and the diner fills with the comfortable noise of good conversation and shared understanding, Evie looks around the table and realizes she's found something she didn't even know she was looking for. A community that celebrates adventure rather than fearing it, that sees age as accumulation of wisdom rather than loss of capability. Saturday's ride suddenly feels less like a risk and more like a homecoming to a version of herself she thought was lost forever. The drive home from Murphy's Diner takes on the quality of a parade, with Ruby following Evie's Harley in her mother's borrowed Honda, hazard lights blinking in what can only be described as celebratory escort formation. At red lights, Ruby rolls down her window to shout encouragement. "You look so badass, Grandma," drawing stares from other drivers who clearly can't process the sight of an 80-year-old woman on a motorcycle being cheered on by a purple-haired teenager. Back at Evie's house, they sit at the kitchen table with laptops open and coffee growing cold, surrounded by maps and notebooks as Ruby transforms into an unexpectedly efficient research assistant. "Okay," Ruby says, her fingers flying across her keyboard with the digital fluency of her generation. "So Rev mentioned the Grey Riders did a trip to the Grand Canyon last year. Look at this route." She turns her screen toward Evie, showing a serpentine path across multiple states marked with icons for scenic overlooks and motorcycle-friendly stops. Evie studies the screen, feeling something spark in her chest that has nothing to do with rebellion and everything to do with possibility. "That's over 2,000 miles. So, you've got time," and Rev said the bike's built for distance. Ruby clicks through more websites, her enthusiasm infectious. "Plus, look at this. There's a whole network of places that cater to motorcycle tourists. Hotels that have secure parking, restaurants with bike-friendly layouts, even gear shops along major routes." The practical nurse in Evie begins to emerge, the part of her that once coordinated complex patient care and managed life and death logistics. She opens her own laptop, ancient by Ruby's standards but functional, and begins making lists with the systematic approach that once made her legendary among hospital staff. "If I were really going to do this," she says, emphasizing the hypothetical nature while her pen moves across paper with growing certainty, "I'd need to contact people first, let them know I'm coming." "Like who?" Evie thinks about the Christmas cards that arrive each year from nursing school classmates scattered across the country. Friends she trained with 55 years ago, who became ICU directors and emergency room supervisors and hospital administrators before retiring to gardens and grandchildren. "My nursing school class," she says slowly, "we graduated together in 1969. Promised we'd stay in touch, see each other regularly." She laughs at the memory of their naive confidence that geography and life wouldn't interfere with friendship. "Most of us haven't seen each other in decades." Ruby's eyes light up with the particular excitement of someone who has just discovered a perfect project. Where are they? For the next hour, they dive into the archaeology of Evie's past. Ruby proves surprisingly adept at finding people through social media and internet searches, while Evie provides context and stories that bring names on screens to life. Margaret Hughes in Denver, who once stayed awake for 36 hours straight caring for victims of a hotel fire. Susan Chen in Phoenix, who became the first Asian American head nurse at her hospital and fought for bilingual patient care. Dorothy Williams in Santa Fe, who left nursing to become a midwife and delivered over 3,000 babies before retiring. Grandma, Ruby says quietly as names and locations accumulate on their map. These women are incredible. They are. Evie feels the weight of connections long neglected, friendships that survived decades of Christmas cards but deserved more. We all were, I suppose. We had to be in those days. Nursing was different then. More responsibility, less recognition. Like riding motorcycles now? The parallel hadn't occurred to Evie, but Ruby's comparison is startlingly accurate. Both require competence in the face of skepticism, confidence despite others, doubts about capability. Maybe, Evie admits, they're deep in route planning when Frank's familiar knock interrupts their research. Ruby glances toward the door with the wariness of someone whose family alliances have recently shifted, but Evie waves her to continue working. Frank, Evie says, opening the door to find her brother-in-law carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil. What's this? Leftover pot roast. Figured you might not have felt like cooking after this morning's excitement. His eyes move past her to where Ruby sits surrounded by maps and laptops. Planning something? The question hangs in the air with the weight of someone who recognizes preparation when he sees it. Ruby looks up from her screen with the expression of a co-conspirator caught in the act, and Evie realizes that secrets are becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Sit down, she says, gesturing Frank toward the table. Ruby, show him what we've found. For the next 30 minutes, Ruby walks Frank through their research with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a doctoral dissertation. Routes and stops, motorcycle-friendly accommodations, the network of old friends waiting to be reconnected with across thousands of miles of American highway. Frank listens without interruption, his face cycling through concern, admiration, and something that might be envy. When Ruby finishes her presentation, he sits back in his chair and looks directly at Evie. You're planning to ride across the country, he says. I'm considering it. Alone? Probably. Frank is quiet for a long moment, his banker's mind clearly calculating risks and logistics. That's a hell of a thing to consider. Is that approval or disapproval? It's recognition, Frank says carefully, that you're more like your husband than any of us realized. The comparison to Tom hits Evie unexpectedly. Her late husband had been the dreamer in their marriage, the one who talked about cross-country trips and adventures they'd take someday. She'd been the practical one, the planner, the person who kept dreams tethered to reality. Tom would have loved this, she admits. Tom would have been terrified and proud in equal measure. Frank corrects. Just like I am right now. Ruby looks between them with the particular attention of someone watching adult relationships navigate uncharted territory. Are you going to try to stop her? Frank considers the question seriously. I'm going to try to make sure she's prepared. There's a difference. Over the following days, preparation becomes an elaborate dance involving multiple conspirators and careful timing to avoid Maggie's surveillance. Ruby proves invaluable as both research assistant and lookout, texting warnings when her mother's car appears in the neighborhood, and covering for Evie's absences with elaborate stories about grocery shopping and doctor's appointments. At the travel clinic, Dr. Martinez, a young physician who treats Evie with the professional respect one medical professional shows another, declares her fit for travel with the kind of thorough evaluation that leaves no room for family objections. Your cardiovascular health is excellent, he says, reviewing test results with obvious approval. Blood pressure's better than mine, reflexes are sharp, and your medication regimen is stable and portable. He looks up from her chart with something approaching admiration. How long since you retired from nursing? 15 years. I can tell. You've maintained the habits that keep healthcare workers healthy. Regular exercise, preventative care, stress management. He signs off on travel clearances with decisive strokes. Whatever adventure you're planning, your body's ready for it. The motorcycle preparation proves equally encouraging. Jake performs a comprehensive inspection of the Harley, replacing fluids and adjusting components with the thoroughness of someone who understands that mechanical failure 2,000 miles from home is more than inconvenience. It's potential catastrophe. She's built for this, he says, running his hands over chrome and leather with obvious affection. Touring bikes are designed for long distances, and this one's barely broken in. Just needs proper maintenance and respect. The gear upgrades feel like armor for a quest. Improved rain gear that will keep her dry through mountain weather. Upgraded gloves that will prevent hand fatigue during long riding days. A communication system that will keep her connected to emergency contacts and navigation. Each purchase feels like an investment in possibility. It's while reviewing route options at Tora's Motorcycles that Rev appears, ostensibly browsing but clearly drawn by curiosity about Evie's expanding collection of long-distance touring equipment. Planning something ambitious? He asks, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes bright with interest. Evie shows him the maps Ruby has marked with potential stops and scenic routes, watching his face as he traces the path with one finger. His expression shifts from curiosity to something approaching awe. This is serious, he says. This isn't a day trip or a weekend adventure. This is a vision quest. Is that what it is? Might be. Rev looks up from the maps to meet her eyes. I've done a couple of these myself. Long rides to places that matter, usually when I needed to figure something out or prove something to myself. What did you prove? That I was still alive in all the ways that count. His smile carries weight of experience and hard-won wisdom. Also that good friends make even the best adventures better. The implication hangs in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Evie feels her pulse quicken with something that has nothing to do with motorcycle engines and everything to do with the possibility of companionship, not just for the journey, but for whatever comes after. I couldn't ask anyone to, she begins, but Rev cuts her off. You're not asking, I'm offering. Portions of the route, anyway. I've got friends to visit in Colorado and Arizona. Could time it to coincide with your schedule, if you're interested in having company for some of the miles. The offer transforms everything. What had felt like a solo act of defiance suddenly becomes shared adventure. The difference between proving a point and actually living. I'd like that, Evie says, surprised by how much she means it. It's Sarah who stumbles onto their planning, arriving unannounced with Emma and Jake in tow, supposedly to check on her mother, but clearly driven by guilt over the morning's confrontation. She finds Evie and Ruby in the living room, surrounded by maps and guidebooks, deep in discussion about daily mileage limits and rest day frequency. Mom? Sarah's voice carries confusion rather than anger, as if she's walked into a room and found furniture rearranged in impossible ways. What's all this? Ruby looks to Evie with raised eyebrows, clearly asking permission to explain or deflect. But something in Sarah's expression, curiosity rather than judgment, interest rather than immediate opposition, makes Evie decide on honesty. I'm planning a trip, she says simply. A trip? Sarah settles onto the couch, her children automatically gravitating toward Ruby, and the colorful maps spread across the coffee table. Where? Across the country, to visit old friends. See places I never made time for when I was younger. Sarah stares at the maps, her expressions cycling through disbelief, concern, and something that might be longing. On the motorcycle. On the motorcycle. The silence stretches until Emma pipes up with 8-year-old directness. That sounds awesome, Grandma. Can we come? Emma, Sarah says automatically, but her voice lacks conviction. Why not? 10-year-old Jake asks with the logic of someone too young to understand impossible. We went to Disney World last summer, and that was like 1,000 miles. That was in a car, Sarah explains, with air conditioning and seat belts and boring. Emma interjects. This would be an adventure. Evie watches her daughter's face as the children's enthusiasm crashes against adult practicality and fear. But underneath Sarah's concern, she recognizes something familiar. The expression of someone remembering what it felt like to want impossible things. You used to want adventures, Evie says quietly. That was before I had responsibilities. I had responsibilities too. I just forgot that one of them was to myself. Sarah looks at the maps again, and Evie can see her tracing routes not with her mother's eyes but with her own, seeing possibilities instead of dangers, adventures instead of risks. How long would you be gone? Sarah asks. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Depending on weather and how long I want to stay in each place. And you'd be careful? I'd be prepared. There's a difference. Sarah nods slowly, and for the first time since the birthday intervention, Evie sees her youngest daughter, not as another obstacle to navigate, but as a potential ally in the ongoing battle for the right to live fully at any age. Maggie's going to lose her mind, Sarah says finally. Probably. She'll try to stop you. She can try. Sarah looks at her children, bent over maps and asking Ruby questions about motorcycle camping and scenic overlooks, their faces bright with vicarious excitement. When she looks back at Evie, her expression has shifted to something approaching decision. What can I do to help? She asks. The question changes everything. Not just the logistics of planning, but the entire family dynamic that has shaped their relationship since Tom's death. For the first time in decades, one of her children is asking how to support Evie's dreams instead of protecting her from them. Be my backup, Evie says. Someone who knows my route, my schedule, my check-in plan. Someone who can tell the difference between adventure and actual emergency. I can do that, Sarah says, and Evie hears in her voice the echo of the fearless young woman who once backpacked through Europe and taught yoga on beaches in Thailand before settling into suburban motherhood. As the afternoon dissolves into evening planning session, with Ruby updating online maps and Sarah contributing suggestions from her own travel experience, Evie realizes that what started as an act of rebellion has become something else entirely. A family project that honors both adventure and love, both independence and connection. The cross-country journey is no longer just about proving she can do it. It's about showing everyone, including herself, who she becomes when she stops asking permission to live. Dawn arrives like a promise kept, painting Evie's kitchen windows in shades of rose and gold as she stands at the counter, nursing her third cup of coffee and watching the world wake up around her. The red Harley waits in her garage, loaded with carefully packed saddlebags and a small tail bag that contains 3 weeks' worth of carefully chosen necessities. Everything else, the fears, the family drama, the weight of 80 years of being careful, she's leaving behind. The note sits folded on the kitchen table, her handwriting steady despite the magnitude of what it represents. My dear children, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere in Pennsylvania, riding toward a life I should have lived decades ago. This isn't about punishing you or proving points. It's about remembering who I am when I'm not being who you think I should be. I'll call when I can, check in regularly, and send pictures from the road. Ruby has my complete itinerary and emergency contacts. Sarah knows my route and schedule. I'm not disappearing. I'm just becoming visible again. Try to understand. I spent 35 years saving other people's lives. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left actually living my own. Love always, Mom. P.S. Maggie, if you're reading this first, legal action will only guarantee that I never come home. Trust me instead. I've earned that much. Asterisk. At 6:47 a.m., she wheels the Harley out of her garage and into a world still soft with morning mist. The engine's rumble seems louder in the quiet neighborhood, and she catches Mrs. Patterson peeking through her curtains with the particular expression of someone witnessing either a miracle or a catastrophe. Evie waves cheerfully, enjoying the woman's obvious confusion. The first miles of her journey take her through familiar territory. Past the high school where David teaches art to reluctant teenagers, past the yoga studio where Sarah guides suburban mothers through downward dogs and life transitions, past the courthouse where Maggie builds her career on controlling outcomes and managing risks. Each landmark feels like a goodbye to the version of herself who lived small and safe. By the time she reaches the interstate, the morning has burned off its mist and settled into the kind of perfect riding weather that makes motorcyclists believe in divine providence. The Harley settles into highway rhythm with the steady confidence of a machine built for exactly this purpose, eating miles with mechanical grace while Evie discovers the meditative quality of long-distance riding. There's something hypnotic about the steady vibration of the engine, the way the road unfolds in endless ribbons of possibility ahead of her windshield. Her mind, freed from the constant vigilance required by city riding, begins to wander in directions it hasn't explored in decades. She thinks about Tom, about the cross-country trip they planned but never took, always waiting for the right time that never came. She thinks about her nursing school friends, scattered across a continent, probably drinking morning coffee in their own kitchens, while having no idea that one of their classmates is riding toward reunion at 70 miles per hour. The first challenge arrives with Pennsylvania's mountains, where interstate highways carve through terrain that tests both machine and rider. The Harley climbs steady grades without complaint, but Evie feels her inexperience in the way the bike wants to drift in crosswinds, the way passing trucks create turbulence that requires constant minor corrections. Each mile builds her confidence while teaching her respect for forces beyond her control. It's approaching noon, when the sky begins to darken with the particular ominous quality that experienced travelers learn to read like weather reports. 20 minutes later, she's caught in rain that transforms the interstate into a test of everything Jake taught her about wet weather riding. The Harley's tires grip pavement turn treacherous, and Evie discovers muscles she forgot she had as she fights wind and rain and the spray from passing vehicles. But instead of fear, she feels exhilaration. This is what her children were so afraid of, the possibility of challenge, discomfort, even danger. What they couldn't understand is that meeting such challenges and surviving them intact is exactly what makes survival feel like victory. She takes shelter under a truck stop overpass, pulling off her helmet to wipe rain from her face and assess the situation. Around her, other motorcyclists have made the same decision. A brotherhood of people who understand that sometimes the smart choice is strategic patience rather than stubborn persistence. "First long trip?" asks a rider on a BMW touring bike, his German accent adding authority to the question. "Is it that obvious?" Rain panic. "Gets easier." He gestures toward the sky where the storm shows signs of breaking up. 20 minutes? Maybe 30, then good riding again. He's right. The storm passes as quickly as it arrived, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Evie remounts the Harley with water still dripping from her rain gear, feeling like someone who has passed an important test. The road ahead shines like polished metal, and she understands why people become addicted to this particular combination of risk and reward. By mid-afternoon, she's deep into Pennsylvania coal country, the landscape rolling past in shades of green and gray that speak of industry and endurance. Her phone buzzes with the first of what will become a daily ritual, a text from Ruby. "How's the road treating you, badass grandma?" She pulls over at a scenic overlook to respond, her thumbs clumsy with the phone's small keyboard. "Wet but wonderful. Making good time." Ruby's response is immediate. Mom's freaking out but trying to hide it. Dad's proud but won't admit it. Sarah's been checking weather reports all morning. "You're famous." The idea of being famous for anything other than responsible behavior feels strange and wonderful. For 70 years, her reputation has been built on predictability, reliability, being someone others could count on to make sensible choices. Now she's becoming someone people talk about, someone whose choices surprise and inspire rather than comfort and reassure. It's late afternoon when she hears the telltale sound that every motorcyclist dreads, the subtle change in road contact that announces a tire losing pressure. She pulls over on a rural highway, dismounting to confirm what she already knows. The rear tire is going flat with the steady persistence of air finding an escape route. For a moment, she considers panic. She's 200 miles from home, on a road that sees more farm equipment than assistance vehicles. With a mechanical problem she's never faced alone. But instead of fear, she feels the familiar calm that once served her in emergency rooms when everything was chaos but someone had to remain steady. She's digging through her emergency kit, looking for the tire repair supplies Jake insisted she carry, when the sound of another motorcycle approaches. The bike that pulls over behind her is a vintage Harley touring machine that looks like it has seen every mile of highway between coasts. And the man who dismounts moves with the casual confidence of someone who has solved this particular problem countless times. "Rev?" Evie stares in amazement as Tommy Patterson removes his helmet, his silver hair catching late afternoon light. "Fancy meeting you here," he says with a grin that doesn't quite hide his obvious relief at finding her safe. "Having some trouble? How are you? What are you?" Evie struggles with the mathematics of coincidence that have brought him to this particular stretch of highway at exactly the right moment. "Might have been keeping an eye on your route," Rev admits, his expression sheepish. "Not following. Exactly. Just making sure you're not alone when Murphy's Law kicks in." Any other day, such protective behavior might have felt condescending, another attempt to manage her choices and limit her independence. But standing beside a disabled motorcycle on an empty highway, Evie feels only gratitude for someone who understands the difference between support and control. "How did you know?" she asks as Rev produces tools from his saddlebags with the efficiency of long practice. 60 years of riding, quote, he says, kneeling beside her rear wheel to examine the problem. "You learn to read roads, predict problems. This stretch of highway's hard on tires. Too much construction debris. The repair takes 20 minutes and involves Rev teaching her tire patching techniques with the patience of someone who believes in competence over helplessness. By the time they're finished, Evie has learned skills she hopes never to need again, but feels empowered by possessing. "Thank you," she says as they prepare to continue their journeys. "Thank you," Rev replies. "Following your progress has been the most interesting thing to happen to me in months." "Following my progress?" Ruby's been posting updates on social media. "You're becoming quite the inspiration to people who thought adventure had expiration dates." The idea of inspiring anyone feels surreal, but Rev's expression suggests he's entirely serious. They part ways at the next intersection. Rev heading toward his own planned stops, Evie continuing toward her first overnight destination. But the knowledge that someone is tracking her journey with admiration rather than anxiety changes everything about the remaining miles. She reaches the roadside inn just as twilight settles over rural Pennsylvania, the motel's neon sign promising clean rooms, bike parking, coffee, in letters that flicker with nostalgic charm. The parking area hosts a surprising number of motorcycles, and the desk clerk, a young woman with multiple piercings and an obvious appreciation for anyone brave enough to ride alone, greets her with genuine enthusiasm. "You're the lady riding cross-country," she exclaims, processing Evie's registration with obvious excitement. "Someone posted about you online. Said you just started riding at 80? Word travels fast. Best kind of news. Room 12, right next to the bike parking. There's a diner next door that stays open late if you're hungry." The motel room is exactly what Evie expected. Clean, basic, functional. But it feels like luxury after 8 hours on the road. She showers away the day's accumulation of rain and road dust, then sits on the bed with her phone and the list of old friends Ruby helped her compile. Margaret Hughes answers on the second ring, her voice still carrying the authority that made her legendary among Denver's emergency room staff. "Evie Morrison?" Margaret's tone suggests she's still processing caller ID information. "Is that really you?" "It's really me. And I'm calling to ask if you'd like to have lunch on Thursday." "Thursday? This Thursday?" "Evie, I'm in Denver and you're in..." "Where are you calling from?" "Pennsylvania, but I'll be in Denver by Thursday." The silence on the other end stretches long enough that Evie wonders if the connection has failed. Then Margaret's laughter comes through the phone like music, rich with the particular joy of someone rediscovering a friend they thought was lost to time and distance. "Are you telling me," Margaret says slowly, "that you're driving to Denver?" "Riding, actually, on a motorcycle." More silence, then more laughter. "Evie Morrison, you magnificent woman. Thursday it is. I'll clear my calendar and find the best restaurant in the city." This conversation requires wine and about 6 hours of catching up. After hanging up, Evie sits in the growing darkness of her motel room, feeling the day's achievements settle into her bones like contentment. 247 miles of highway conquered, mechanical problems solved, old friendships rekindled. Her body aches in places she forgot existed, but her spirit feels lighter than it has in decades. Her phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. "Made it safely? The whole family's pretending not to worry." She types back, "Safe and sound in Pennsylvania. Tell them I'm too stubborn to die on the first day." Sarah's response comes immediately. They're proud of you. Even Maggie, though she'll never admit it. As Evie settles into sleep in a bed 200 miles from everything familiar, she thinks about the miles ahead, the friends waiting to be surprised, the person she's becoming one highway mile at a time. Tomorrow will bring new roads, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that adventure doesn't have expiration dates. For the first time in 23 years, she falls asleep excited about tomorrow. The Mountain View Motel in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, sits like a postcard against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks, its rustic charm enhanced by the dozen motorcycles parked in neat rows outside the office. Evie has spent the morning exploring the town's hot springs with Rev, her muscles grateful for the mineral-rich waters after 3 days of highway riding. She's feeling more confident, more herself than she has in years when she spots the familiar silver BMW pulling into the parking lot with the aggressive precision of someone on a mission. "Shit," she mutters, a word she hasn't used in decades but that perfectly captures the sight of Maggie emerging from the driver's seat like an avenging angel in a business suit. "Company?" Rev asks, following her gaze to where David unfolds his lanky frame from the passenger side, his face bearing the expression of someone who has been conscripted into a war he didn't choose. "Family," Evie says grimly, watching Maggie scan the parking lot until her eyes lock onto the red Harley like a targeting system acquiring its objective. The confrontation begins before Evie can even cross the parking lot. Maggie advances with the controlled fury of a prosecutor who has discovered perjury, her heels clicking against asphalt with military precision. 3 days, Maggie says, her voice carrying across the lot with enough volume to draw attention from other motel guests. 3 days we've been worried sick while you've been playing Easy Rider across half the country. I've been calling Ruby every evening, Evie replies, straightening her shoulders and channeling the authority that once made difficult doctors listen to her assessments. I've been in contact with Sarah. You knew I was safe. Safe? Maggie's voice climbs an octave. You call riding a motorcycle across mountain highways safe? You call staying in motels in the middle of nowhere safe? David approaches more cautiously, his art teacher's instincts clearly recognizing a situation that requires de-escalation rather than confrontation. Mom, we were worried. When you didn't answer your phone this morning, I was in the hot springs. People don't usually take phones into mineral baths. We didn't know that. Maggie explodes, and suddenly Evie can see past her daughter's anger to the fear beneath, genuine terror that masquerades as control because control feels more manageable than helplessness. We've been calling hospitals, checking accident reports. You've been tracking my credit card usage. Evie interrupts, watching Maggie's face confirm the accusation. Don't deny it. That's how you found me. The admission hangs in the mountain air like an indictment. Around them, other motel guests have begun to gather, motorcyclists drawn by the familiar drama of family conflict over riding choices, tourists intrigued by the sight of an elderly woman in full riding gear facing down what appears to be an intervention. Of course I tracked your credit cards, Maggie says, abandoning any pretense of respecting privacy. You disappeared without warning on a machine you barely know how to ride. I know how to ride it just fine, Evie interrupts, gesturing toward the Harley that has carried her over 800 miles without incident. I know how to maintain it, how to handle weather, how to solve problems when they arise. Like the flat tire in Pennsylvania? David asks quietly. Evie turns to stare at her son, realizing the extent of their surveillance. You've been following my entire journey. Ruby posts updates. David admits. And yes, we've been watching. Worried sick, but watching. It's Rev who steps forward then, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic from family intervention to something more complex. Ma'am, he says to Maggie with the particular courtesy that comes from decades of dealing with difficult situations, I'm Rev Patterson. I've been riding with your mother. Maggie's gaze moves between Rev and Evie with the sharp assessment of someone calculating new variables in an already complex equation. You're the man who's been encouraging this insanity. I'm the man who's been ensuring she's not alone when challenges arise, Rev corrects calmly. Like the tire repair in Pennsylvania, which she handled with competence after I taught her the necessary skills. She shouldn't need those skills. Maggie's control finally cracks completely, revealing the raw fear that has been driving her behavior. She should be home, safe, letting people who care about her. Control her? Evie finishes. Manage her? Decide what risks she's allowed to take? Protect her! Maggie screams, and suddenly the parking lot goes quiet, except for the sound of wind through pine trees and the distant hum of highway traffic. The silence stretches until it's broken by the sound of another car approaching too fast, tires squealing on asphalt as Sarah's minivan pulls into the lot, with Emma and Jake visible through the windows. Sarah emerges looking like someone who has driven through the night on coffee and determination, her usually composed demeanor replaced by something approaching desperation. Thank God, Sarah breathes, rushing toward the group. When Maggie said you were having a health emergency. What health emergency? Evie and Rev ask simultaneously. Maggie's face flushes, with something approaching shame. I may have exaggerated the urgency. You told me she collapsed, Sarah says, rounding on her sister with the particular fury of someone who has been manipulated. You said she was in the hospital. I said she might need to be in the hospital if we didn't find her soon. The distinction lands like a bomb among the gathered family members. Even David, usually willing to give Maggie the benefit of doubt, stares at his sister with something approaching horror. You lied. Ruby's voice cuts through the tension as she emerges from Sarah's van, purple hair bright against the mountain landscape. You actually lied to get us here. I didn't lie, Maggie protests. I expressed legitimate concern about potential medical. You lied. Ruby repeats with teenage directness that cuts through legal parsing. And you used Mom's fear to manipulate her into driving all night. The accusation creates another silence, this one heavy with the weight of trust damaged and family bonds strained beyond their breaking points. When Evie speaks again, her voice carries the authority of someone who has had enough. This ends now, she says, looking each of her children in the eye. Maggie, your fear of losing me is making you lose me anyway. David, your refusal to take sides is a side in itself. Sarah, thank you for driving through the night, but no one needed rescuing. Mom, David begins, but Evie holds up a hand. I'm not finished. I understand that you're afraid. I understand that seeing me on this motorcycle, taking these risks, forces you to confront the fact that I'm not going to live forever. But neither are you. And spending whatever time we have left fighting about my right to live it fully is a waste we can't afford. She pauses, feeling the weight of 3 generations watching her, each dealing with their own fears about aging, independence, and the courage required to live authentically. I'm continuing this journey, she says finally, with or without your blessing, with or without your understanding. But I'd rather continue it knowing that my family trusts me to make my own choices, even if those choices scare you. It's Rev who breaks the tension, addressing Maggie directly with the calm authority of someone who has navigated family crises before. Your mother has excellent judgment, proper equipment, and the support of experienced riders. She's not being reckless. She's being alive. Around them, the gathering crowd of motorcyclists nods in agreement, their presence a reminder that Evie's journey is part of a larger community that understands the difference between necessary risk and dangerous stupidity. Sarah is the first to speak, her voice quiet but firm. I want to support this. I want to be the daughter who celebrates her mother's courage instead of fearing it. David nods slowly. Me too. I'm tired of being afraid of everything. All eyes turn to Maggie, who stands in the mountain parking lot looking isolated and outnumbered, her legal mind clearly searching for arguments that will restore her sense of control over an uncontrollable situation. What if something happens? She asks finally, and for the first time her voice carries vulnerability instead of authority. Then something happens. Evie replies gently. And you'll handle it, because that's what families do. But something wonderful is happening right now, and I don't want fear to make us miss it. The confession hangs in the Colorado mountain air like morning mist, fragile and transformative. Maggie stands in the motel parking lot surrounded by family and strangers who have just witnessed her deepest fear laid bare, And for the first time in months, she looks less like a prosecutor and more like a frightened daughter. "I can't lose you, too," she whispers, the words barely audible above the mountain wind. "Dad died so young, and now you're all we have left, and I can't watch you choose to put yourself in danger." The admission breaks something open in all of them. Sarah moves first, crossing the distance between them to wrap her sister in a hug that acknowledges years of Maggie carrying burdens she never asked for. David follows, his long arms encompassing both sisters in the kind of family embrace that used to happen spontaneously before grief and responsibility made them all so careful with each other. "Maggie," Evie says gently, "your father didn't die because he took risks. He died because sometimes life is fragile, no matter how carefully we live it. And you've spent 30 years trying to control the uncontrollable." Rev discreetly withdraws to give the family space, but not before catching Evie's eye with a look that promises he'll be nearby when she's ready to continue both the journey and whatever is growing between them. What follows is 3 days of the most honest conversation the Morrison family has had since Tom's funeral. They move their reunion to a cabin rental outside town, where mountain silence provides the perfect backdrop for decades of unspoken truths finally finding voice. Maggie talks about the weight of feeling responsible for everyone after their father died, how her divorce has left her feeling like she's failing at everything that matters. "I built my whole identity around being in control," she admits during one late-night conversation by the fireplace. "And when you bought that motorcycle, it felt like everything I'd worked to keep safe was falling apart." David reveals his own fears, how he's spent his life avoiding conflict because he watched his family torn apart by grief, how he's never pursued his real artistic dreams because taking risks felt selfish when everyone else was struggling. "I've been hiding," he says simply, "from my own life." Sarah's confessions surprise them all. The free-spirited daughter, who seemed to have settled into conventional motherhood, admits she's been suffocating under the weight of others' expectations. "I gave up the adventure travel business because everyone said it was too risky for a mother. But I think about those trips every day. The places I wanted to show people, the experiences I wanted to create." Ruby, documenting everything with the particular intensity of someone witnessing family mythology being rewritten in real time, provides running commentary that's both wise and merciless. "You're all scared of the wrong things," she observes during one particularly heated discussion. "Grandma's not risking her life, she's saving it." The breakthrough comes when Evie shares her own truth, that the motorcycle isn't about rebellion or proving points, but about remembering who she was before she became everyone else's idea of who she should be. "I spent so many years being your father's wife, your mother, the reliable nurse everyone could count on. I forgot I was also Evie, the woman who dreamed of adventures and took chances and believed impossible things were possible." By the third day, something fundamental has shifted. Maggie agrees to family therapy and individual counseling to address her control issues. David announces he's taking a sabbatical from teaching to pursue his art seriously, maybe even apply to graduate school programs he's been researching for years. Sarah starts making phone calls about restarting her adventure travel business, this time with her children as enthusiastic supporters rather than obstacles. "I want them to see their mother taking risks and following dreams," she says, watching Emma and Jake plan imaginary motorcycle trips with their grandmother. "I want them to know that being responsible doesn't mean being afraid." When Evie prepares to continue her journey, the family sends her off with blessings instead of ultimatums. Maggie's goodbye includes an awkward but genuine apology and a promise to work on trusting rather than controlling. David gives her a small watercolor painting of the Colorado mountains, his first real art in years. Sarah provides detailed maps of adventure tour routes she remembers from her traveling days. Rev reappears as promised, his own bike loaded for the continuation of their parallel journeys. The romantic tension that has been building between them finally finds expression in a kiss that tastes like possibility and promises of shared tomorrows. The remaining weeks of Evie's journey unfold like a dream made real. She reconnects with nursing school friends who greet her arrival with tears and laughter and stories that bridge decades of separation. Margaret Hughes in Denver, Susan Chen in Phoenix, Dorothy Williams in Santa Fe. Each reunion reinforces the truth that some friendships transcend time and distance, waiting patiently to be rekindled. The journey's final destination is the nursing school in San Francisco, where it all began 55 years ago. The building has been renovated and modernized, but the spirit remains the same: young people learning to save lives and serve others. Standing in the lobby where she once stood as a nervous 25-year-old, Evie feels the completion of a circle she didn't know she was drawing. The homecoming party Sarah organizes at Evie's house includes not just family but the entire Grey Riders community, creating a celebration that spans generations and represents the new family dynamics they've all worked to create. Ruby films everything for a documentary project she's started about aging and adventure. Emma and Jake pepper Rev's riding companions with questions about motorcycle maintenance and road trip planning. Most significantly, Maggie arrives not with legal documents or safety lectures, but with genuine curiosity about her mother's experiences and tentative interest in possibly learning to ride herself. Not a motorcycle, she clarifies quickly, but maybe a scooter. Something with training wheels. Frank, who has been quietly dating a widow he met at a senior center motorcycle safety course, announces his own plans for adventure, a trip to Alaska he's been postponing since his wife's death. Evie taught me something important, he says, raising a glass of champagne in the crowded living room. The best way to honor the dead is to refuse to stop living. As the party winds down and family members head home to their transformed lives, Evie sits on her front porch with Rev, watching the sunset paint Millbrook's suburban streets in shades of gold and possibility. "Any regrets?" he asks. "Only that I waited so long," she replies, then adds with a smile that would have surprised her children just months ago. "But I suppose some things can't be rushed. I had to become 80 to have the courage to be 25 again." Rev's laughter mingles with the sound of motorcycles starting up as the Grey Riders prepare for their own journeys home. But this time, Evie knows, they're not saying goodbye. They're planning the next adventure. At 80 years old, she's finally learned the most important lesson of all. Life doesn't end when others think it should. It begins whenever you decide to stop asking permission to live it fully. The red Harley sits in her garage, cleaned and maintained and ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn Morrison can't wait to find out what that might be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,